It's been a while. In my defense, I've been extremely busy over the last, oh my goodness, it's been 8 months. So I've been pretty busy, had my own little set of adventures that I cannot wait to talk about, but that I will save for a future set of videos. Yes, videos, plural. I intend to make multiple videos about what I saw on my little adventures, but we'll get there when we get there. In the meantime, this video is a bit of a follow-up / continuation, I guess. No, it's more of an elaboration on something I discussed in my zoology video. Please watch that if you haven't. I know it's a little rusty. Once again, I am extremely new to this whole YouTube job. This is only the second full-length video that I will be putting out on this channel, but I will do my absolute freaking best to pump out some more content in the future. Of course, I am a college student. I am a biochemistry major, so as a result, I am extremely busy, but I will do my best to try to maintain a semi-consistent upload schedule. Anyway, before I ramble on and on about my personal life, let's get started. So it's been a while, so let me reintroduce myself. Hello there, my name is Akhil Sundar. I am, or at least I refer to myself as, an amateur zoologist, and I'm here today to talk to you about Alright, so biological classification is the way that we tend to organize organisms. That works out pretty well. The reason that we humans like to organize organisms is because we are trying to perceive nature in a way that we can understand with our paltry human senses, or brains. Now, of course, this isn't perfect. No model of nature ever truly is. There's all sorts of things that you have to take into account whenever you're designing a model for this sort of thing. Now, however, I will say the biological classification system, the taxonomic system, is the best that we have. It is a really freaking good model. It's been through all sorts of things, and it's come out stronger from each adversity, from each hurdle. So it is a good system. And if it wasn't a good system, we would not still be using it. Anyway, so how do we classify organelles? Organisms. Organelles are little things within a cell, but I'll get to that in a second. The way we organize organisms is in 8 major, I want to call them tiers, we'll call them levels of classification. Keyword is major. We do have some minor ones in there, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. So, when we're talking about the 8 major levels of classification, they are, in this order: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, with the domains being the most broad, and the species, of course, being the most specific. Domains have the most organisms inside them, and species have the fewest. Now, of course, where this gets tricky is sometimes you'll have a suborder or a sublevel. You'll get suborders, which I obviously just mentioned. You have subphyla, subclasses, subfamilies, subgenera. Genera is the plural of genus. So it's not genuses, it is genera, which is pretty intriguing. And honestly, I didn't even know that subgenera existed until I started doing research for this a couple weeks ago. But you have subgenera, you have subspecies, you have all sorts of sublevels and infralevels and so on and so forth. So it gets a little tricky when we start to consider those. I will mention those, like whenever I talk about a specific animal. In the future, I'm not really going to talk about plants or bacteria or other kingdoms as much as I will talk about animals, because after all, I am an amateur zoologist, not an amateur ecologist. Although I will try to work ecology into here every now and then, because they kind of do go hand in hand, but my focus is more on animals than any other group of organisms. What was I saying? Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. Anyway, yeah, so you get a bunch of sublevels and infralevels and whatnot, but for now, we'll just focus on the big 8. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, there are different ways that you could choose to remember this. You could just brute force memorize it like I have, or you could also use a mnemonic device. We use mnemonic devices all the time in language and even in biology. Anyway, let's get back on topic. Going back to all these levels, the domains are the most broad. There are 3 domains. They're the eukarya, the bacteria, and the archaea. Now, if you want to learn the differences, I could explain it, or I could also defer to my superior science communicators, such as Hank Green over at Crash Course. He has a bunch of fantastic biology tutorials if you want to check him out. I'm pretty sure he has one on cells. I haven't checked in a moment. I should probably check that soon. But in summary, obviously go to Hank if you want to learn more, or Mr. Green if you want to learn more. But in summary, eukaryotic cells are different from prokaryotic cells. Bacteria and archaea are what we call prokaryotes. They do not have a nucleus that holds their DNA. Eukaryotic cells, like the cells that make up us, do have a nucleus that holds their DNA, their genetic material. That genetic material is used to code for proteins, and different proteins correlate with different functions. In fact, this is what I'm getting to. We can actually compare the DNA of different organisms to see where they line up with each other in the biological classification system. So, organisms in the same genus have more similar DNA than organisms in the same phylum. It's pretty cool. Of course, there are other things that we can use DNA for, but for a broader sense, they allow us to determine how closely related every organism is. And one cool thing about DNA is that we can actually we know the rate at which mutations occur in the genome. So we can actually track that. We can track the rate of mutation over millions of years to try and figure out how quickly everything evolved. It's really freaking cool. And there's a lot of research obviously being done with DNA and evolutionary lineages. And now that I've said the word evolution, I should probably say, if you do not believe in evolution, please do not try to debunk it in this comment section. I plan on creating a whole other video on evolution. So if you have any qualms with my use of the word, please hold your tongue. I do plan on making that video soon. Of course, I am stupid busy, and it's a little further on my video slate, but I will get there eventually, either this year or next year, and I will release an evolution video. So please jot down your criticism of evolution in the comments of that video. I'll try to bring on a couple experts and so on and so forth. But for now, let's please keep that discourse out of the comment section here. Let's focus on the subject at hand. Everybody got that? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so there are 5 or 6, depending on where you are and what textbooks you've used throughout your academic career. There are 5 or 6 distinct kingdoms, biological kingdoms. Now, I specifically am going to be talking about the animal kingdom for obvious reasons. I'm a zoologist, or an amateur zoologist. Technically not qualified. I'm just talking about what I've learned and what I've seen throughout my, albeit pretty few, years of experience. I just want people to learn more. For reference, please check out my only other video as of posting. But anyway, let's get back on track. I'm mostly going to be focusing on the animal kingdom, Kingdom Animalia. Now, there are 9 distinct phyla, plural of phylum, within the Kingdom Animalia. I will say that we can broadly categorize them in 2 groups. You got the I'm getting ahead of myself. The chordates, also known as the vertebrates, phylum Chordata, and you've got the 8 others, which are what we call invertebrates. Now, there is no phylum, Inchordata or Invertebrata or anything like that. These 8 phyla, these 8 clades of organisms. Clade is an ancestor and a common ancestor in all of its descendants, by the way. All 8 of these phyla are broadly grouped together as the invertebrates, mostly because none of them are as big as the vertebrates, at least on average. A few prominent phyla in the invertebrates include the arthropoda, which includes your insects and your crustaceans, the mollusca, which has stuff like snails and bivalves and cephalopods. You've got the Annelidae, the annelid worms, which are a whole bag of worms, literally. But it's a lot. There's a lot going on with the annelid worms. And of course, the echinoderm, the echinodermata. That's going to be like your starfish, your sea urchins, your sea cucumbers, your sea lilies, and a ton of other stuff. By the way, the echinoderms are actually the closest phyla to the chordates. They were the last to diverge from phylum Chordata. So we are closer related to starfish and other echinoderms than we are to any other invertebrates, which is wicked cool, but also once you learn about starfish, it becomes crazy to think about. It has something to do with the development. All the other phyla develop mouth first. Phylum Echinodermata, phylum Chordata, and I believe phylum, like the annelids, develop anus first, which is intriguing to say the least. And yeah, that's something I'll get into a little bit later, where similarities in development and also different like physical traits can also help signal common descent in some cases. Of course, you got exceptions. There's convergent evolution, which is pretty rad, but we do use homology surprisingly often, and it does work out surprisingly often. Of course, this is all second to the wonder that is DNA. And then, of course, you've also got the oldest phylums, which are going to be the Ctenophora, which are the comb jellies and their relatives, the Cnidarians, which are the jellyfish and the anemones and their relatives, and I forget the exact name of it, but the phylum with sea sponges. Now, last I checked, there's some debate on which diverged first, the sea sponges or the comb jellies. And I remember this because if there's been some discussion, because if the comb jellies diverged first, that means that nervous systems have actually evolved separate, independently on at least two separate occasions, which is really cool when you start to think about it. Comb jellies don't really have a brain. They do still have a nervous system that helps them function to some degree. Jellyfish have this as well, despite being 99% water. But if the comb jelly split first, before the sea sponges, that means that it evolved it evolved at least twice, which is crazy considering how complex nervous systems are and nerves are. It's amazing. And then, of course, obviously, there's the other side of that coin where it's entirely possible that the sponges diverged first. And last I checked, that's still a debate. If that debate has been answered, please link to the studies in the comments or let me know in the comments as well. Anyway, now let's talk about classes. Like I said, there are a few major classes when it comes to the vertebrates. I'm not really going to get into the invertebrate classes because it's really freaking difficult. There's so many of them. Like, for example, in the arthropods, you got the insect class, but you've also got the crustaceans. And, of course, I'm no expert. I'm no taxonomic expert. I'm still learning, still doing my best. I'm just here to shout out cool animals. But it's important that we give this background as we're doing this because it's really important to understand how we do this, and it also sets the groundwork for some stuff I'm going to talk about in the future without me having to explain everything and just having to refer back to this video. I've gotten sidetracked again. You see, I'm still getting used to this whole YouTube thing. It's a new experience for me as much as it is for you watching me. It's pretty cool. Anyway, there are 5 major classes, technically 4, honestly, if you look at it. You've got the fish, you've got the mammals, you got the reptiles, you got the amphibians, and you got the birds. Now, it gets tricky because the birds, the aves, class Aves, actually evolved from class Reptilia. It's kind of a nestled clade. So at what point does a class become its own class? What point does a clade become a class? Because if we're including Aves as a class, when it's really just like a subclass of Reptilia, then that could set a precedent for all sorts of other classes in the other phyla as well. And so it gets a little tricky there, but that's not really my area of expertise. I prefer to defer to the experts for that. Okay, so we're almost halfway through. Oh, no, we are halfway through all the levels. If you're still sticking with me, you're doing a fantastic job, all right? You're awesome. Thank you for sticking through all this. It gets a little tricky, even for me, yapping about this. This is like the 5th or 6th time that I sat down to film this, actually. So you can tell I'm getting a little bit rattled, but it's fun. It's really fun to be able to talk about this. Now, of course, I am sitting alone in a room, but it's still fun to talk about this somewhere that isn't my own head. Anyway, we're on the orders, and this is where we start getting more specific. There are a lot of orders, there are a lot of families that are part of those orders, there are a lot of genera that are part of those families, and there are a lot of species that are part of those genera. So obviously I'm not really going to go into any specifics. Instead, let's talk about the scientific name. So let's take a random example. The green anaconda. It's my favorite snake. It's one of my favorite animals, period. They're really cool, and I will see if I can devote an entire video to them in the future. But green anacondas, big snake, native to the Amazon. Their taxonomy goes like this: domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class is Reptilia, order Squamata, family is Boidae, genus is Eunectus, and the species is Eunectus marinus. Now, snakes get a little tricky because they're actually part of a suborder, and that suborder is the order Serpentes, which is a suborder of Squamata. The Squamata are the lizards, and the Serpentes are the snakes. Snakes evolved from lizards. So they're still part of the same order, because a clade is a common ancestor in all of its descendants. They're part of the same clade, they're part of the same order, but they are distinct enough that we've given them their own suborder. Now, of course, when you do write out like the broad scientific name, you technically don't need to include suborders, but it is good to indicate them wherever deemed necessary by the scientific community. So oftentimes you'll see the suborders indicated, you'll see subfamilies indicated, you'll even see subspecies indicated. Honestly, more often than not, you're gonna see subspecies indicated. You don't really get subgenera, although they do exist, because they're almost never deemed necessary. Once again, there's a lot of wiggle room between the different levels, but you don't really need to worry about that right now. So let's just keep the taxonomy of the green anaconda as this. Now, when we talk about the scientific name, we just take the genus name and the species name. By the way, the species is the only name, the species and the subspecies are the only things that aren't capitalized, and the genus, the species, and if it's there, the subspecies, are the only things that are italicized when we're formatting all this. So our scientific name is just going to be that italicized portion. It's just going to be the genus and the species, and the subspecies if it's there. So in this case, with the green anaconda, their scientific name would therefore be Eunectus marinus. Now, that begs an important question. Why do we have to go through all this trouble to make a whole new scientific name for a creature which already has a common name? Why can't I call this a green anaconda instead of Eunectes marinus? And you can. You absolutely can. Now, you can as a member of the public. This is where scientific names come in handy, because if you're a scientist and you're writing about an organism in a paper, you need to be able to use a name that is standardized for the entire scientific community, regardless of language. For example, let's switch gears away from snakes and onto cats. This cat, also known, which goes by many common names, it's known as the cougar, the mountain lion, the puma, the panther, which is a whole other can of beans, but I will get to that in another video. The catamount, which is a name that I have not heard in the wild, but I am aware of its existence, and the Florida panther, in addition to 34 more. This cat has 40 different common names, which is the Guinness World Record, by the way. It's absolutely incredible. I didn't even know that existed until a year ago. Anyway, the reason scientific names exist is because, despite the fact that this cat has 40 different common names, we can all just collectively call it Puma concolor. Genus Puma, species concolor. That's pretty helpful, right? So in the scientific literature, what you'll often see is they will have the common name, well, one common name of an animal, and then the scientific name, typically in parentheses, and then they will use the scientific name for the rest of the paper. Oftentimes, they'll even abbreviate the genus name, and they'll just use the first letter. So, for example, Puma concolor becomes P. concolor. Eunectes marinus becomes E. marinus. If you're taking the Eunectes marinus subspecies of the green anaconda, that would be E. marinus. Pretty clever. And it also saves us from having to write down all of the other, like the family and the order and the phylum and the class and the kingdom and the domain. We don't have to worry about those anymore. It's just the genus and the species. And the subspecies is if it's there. But that's kind of insinuated. And so at the end of the day, despite all of my rambling, that is why biological classification is important. The reason biological classification matters is so that we are able to communicate with each other about what something is, what we're talking about, instead of going, this cat is what I call this, and what you call this. We can just say, we all collectively call it this. So, in summary, there are 8 major levels of biological classification. In this order, it's the domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. The genus and the species are italicized. The species is the only thing in lowercase. Everything else is capitalized. And the genus and the species are what we use as the scientific name of an organism. It doesn't matter if it's a plant, bacteria, an animal, an archaea, a fungus, whatever, it all has the genus and the species name. By the way, one little wrinkle I want to introduce here at the end is that if you can't really get to the genus or the species, it's completely fine to just use the family. Or if you're talking about multiple animals within a genus or family, you can use the genus or the family, and then you can write SP period at the end. So for example, if we are talking about the Eunectes genus as a whole, which includes the green and the yellow anacondas, we would use Eunectes sp to describe them all, to describe the anacondas just generally. And of course, the reason scientific names exist is so that we can standardize communication no matter what language you're talking. Scientific names are usually going to be based in Latin or Greek, or they will occasionally have celebrities' names, but that's a little wacky, and wacky scientific names are for a whole nother video I have planned. Yes, I know I've been slacking. I have a lot of things planned, but I will get them out eventually. I promise you. Anyway, that's about it. That's about all I have for you today, or at least for this video. This isn't going to be the last thing I have today, so if you see me with the same shirt in a later video, like same outfit in a later video, if I sound even more tired, you'll know exactly why. Now, of course, like I said, that's about it. Please stay curious, and remember that the coolest things can be right beneath your feet. You just gotta look for them. Anyway, my name is Akhil Sundar. I am an amateur zoologist, and I am signing off. I'll see you in the next one.